Hello and welcome to the Pursuit Zone. I am your host, Paul Schmid, and I interview explorers from around the globe to bring you their exciting stories. These are people that dream big, break out of their comfort zones, and take on ambitious pursuits. This is episode 171 with Oscar Scafidi, where we talk about his kayak adventure on the Kwanza River in Angola. So let's get into it, and let me introduce Oscar. In June 2016, Oscar Scafidi and teammate Alfy Weston assembled the 1960s-era Klepper Aerius II foldable kayak and set out on the Kwanza River in Angola, which flows 600 miles from its source on the Bié Plateau to the Atlantic Ocean. During the roughly 4-week journey, they experienced many unexpected delays, from dangerous hippos and fishing dams that nearly capsized their boat to government authorities that attempted to deport them. Part of their adventure was to raise funds for the Halo Trust, the oldest and largest humanitarian landmine clearance organization, which has been working for over 2 decades in Angola, a country heavily contaminated with landmines as a result of the 27-year battle for independence from Portugal. You can learn more about the adventure in Oscar's book, Kayak the Kwanza, Source to Sea Along Angola's Longest River, and at kayakthekwanza.com. Oscar Scafidi, welcome to the Pursuit Zone.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Oscar, where are you from?
I was born in Rome in Italy, and I lived there for the first 6 or 7 years of my life. But since then, as you can probably tell from the accent, I moved to the UK. So I lived and studied in the UK and did my university education over there.
Where'd you go to school?
I went to school at a place called Ardingly College, which is in West Sussex. It's in the middle of the countryside in the south of England. I think the only reference point for people not in the UK is that it's quite near Gatwick Airport.
From reading your book, it looks like you speak some Portuguese, some French. You probably speak some Italian. How many languages do you speak?
It depends on your definition of speak. In descending order of quality, I speak English, Italian, Portuguese, French, and Spanish. So that's about it, I think.
Now, how did you end up living in Angola?
I actually was living and working in Sudan back in 2006, a very long time ago, and I just happened to read a book about Angola. It's a book by a very famous Polish journalist called Ryszard Kapuscinski. It's called Another Day of Life. And he was essentially over in Angola in 1975 on the eve of independence from Portuguese rule. And he wrote this incredible short story about the sort of collapse of Portuguese society as they knew it in the country and the impending civil war. And I just found the book so fascinating. I wanted to move to Angola to learn more about the country. And yeah, in 2009, I managed to make it happen. So I moved over to Angola to work at Luanda International School because I'm an international school teacher. So I'm a history teacher.
How did you end up meeting Alfy?
So I met Alfy on the rugby pitch. He was like a friend of a friend. He was out there working for Swire Offshore, who are a big Hong Kong-based conglomerate. I think he was in charge of shipping logistics and supplies for a lot of the offshore oil industry. So I think we met in around 2012, just playing rugby for one of the expatriate teams out there.
Were you always into doing these types of long-distance kayaking or boating adventures, or how did that come about?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm very keen on going to strange and unusual countries, especially in Africa. But before this trip, the most time I'd spent in a kayak was a couple of hours on a lake in the UK. So no, it was all Alfy's idea. So Alfy had already imported the Klepper kayak when he moved to Angola, just to have something to kayak around in, partly on the sea, but also he'd done a few of the lower stretches of the Kwanza River. And yeah, he just came up with the idea. So he found out one day that he was going to be moving to Hong Kong as part of his work. And he wanted one final adventure before leaving. So he decided he's going to do the whole Kwanza River and was hunting around for an expedition partner. And I was the only person that was stupid enough to say yes.
Okay, so the Kwanza River, what's important? What do we need to know about it?
Well, it's the longest river that is exclusively in Angola. I think officially the measurement is it's about 985, 990 kilometers long from source to mouth. feeds out into the Atlantic Ocean just south of the capital city, which is called Luanda, and it starts high up in the Bié Plateau, which is in like the highlands in sort of south central Angola. And it's been an important waterway for hundreds of years. So the Portuguese were moving up and down it from the 15th century onwards. And yeah, it's the currency is named after it in Angola. It's an important part of Angolan culture. So it was great to have the opportunity to travel the whole length of it.
Your book goes into a lot about the history of Angola, the War of Independence, a little bit about the Civil War, all of the landmines that got planted, which was part of why you were doing this. But can you talk a little bit about, what Angola was like during the time that you guys were on this expedition?
Yeah, so I suppose this was only 2016, so it was only a few years ago. So I had the experience of living in Angola from 2009 all the way through to 2014, so a good 5 years. And I mean, modern Angola is very different to what most people would imagine. You type Angola into Google and most of the information you get is to do with the Civil War or some sort of negative press. But in reality, Luanda, the capital city, it's the oldest European-founded city on the Atlantic coastline of Africa. Yeah, it's been there over 500 years, I think. And it is extremely modern, skyscrapers, modern housing, that kind of thing, very fancy waterline, a skyline on the waterline because of oil money. So it is a very strange place to live. At night time, you sit in some of the restaurants, you could almost pretend you were in Hong Kong or somewhere in Western Europe. But as soon as you move out of that capital city and sort of into the interior, that's when you get to the more sort of stereotypical Angola. And there's still a lot of remnants of the war. There's still a lot of poverty. It's not unusual to be driving down the highway in the interior and see tanks or helicopters or other wreckage of the Civil War. And there are a lot of communities in the interior that are still heavily affected by landmine contamination. That's one of the reasons we wanted to raise some money for the Halo Trust when we were doing this trip.
Let's talk a bit about the boat. Was this boat actually from the 1960s?
Yes, Alfy bought it secondhand. I believe he bought it from a German man who'd owned it since it was new. So he bought it new in the 1960s and had never really used it for anything more challenging than going out fishing on the lake. So it had been very well looked after. But yeah, it really was from the 1960s. So the boat was a lot older than both of us.
What color was it?
It was blue. So blue on top.
How much planning did you guys put into getting ready for this?
In total, it took about 9 months of training and planning to get this all done. So from the moment that we agreed we're going to do it to getting out on the water is about 9 months.
What type of training did you do?
I think Alfy and I had very different approaches to training because we were in very different places. So I was in London, whereas Alfy was still in Angola. Alfy's training actually involved getting in the Klepper and getting out onto the Kwanza River, which is quite accessible from Luanda, where he was living, doing some actual paddling out on the Kwanza. I'm not sure how many times he managed to do that, but he did get a realistic idea of what it was going to be like for the final sections. I was stuck in London for the whole time, so my only river was the Thames. I didn't know you're actually allowed to kayak on the Thames because it's an extremely busy waterway in a capital city, but apparently you are, and you don't need any kind of qualification or license to do so. So I just joined a kayaking club in London, and I went out on the Thames with them as many times as I could before heading out to Angola. The Thames is also tidal, like very strongly tidal. So I had some very tough training sessions paddling against the tide, trying to move up and down there, all the while dodging traffic that's coming up and down because it is London. So yeah, slightly different experiences, I think, on the training side of things.
What did you find that kayak training to be worthwhile?
It was definitely worthwhile because, as I said, I didn't really know how to kayak beforehand. I'd really only done a couple of sessions when I was at school. So yeah, certainly worthwhile. I also went to Lee Valley Whitewater Centre, which was constructed for the London Olympics. So they're a big artificial whitewater training area that they have just outside London. So I went over there and did a couple of safety sessions with them. They were fantastic. So they showed me how to cross rapids, how to right the kayak if it flips over, all sorts of safety stuff using safety lines. A bit unusual for them. I mean, normally people just go there to go kayaking on the rapids they have, but they were really supportive. They thought what we were doing was excellent. They wanted to help. So they put together kind of a custom safety training program for me.
Now, when you're in Angola about to do this river, what type of permits do you need to get to make sure that what you're doing is, I guess, legal, so to say.
Yeah, well, whatever permits we needed, it turns out we didn't have them. So one of the unfortunate legacies of Portuguese colonialism is the Angolans inherited the Portuguese love of bureaucracy. In reality, we shouldn't have needed any permits. Alfy was already there on a work visa, which means that he has access to all of the country, doesn't need any permission to go anywhere or do anything, essentially. I inquired at the London embassy before heading over there, and they said, tourist visa has you covered. So tourist visa gave me access to the whole country, including the whole river. So given that it was a not-for-profit trip, there was absolutely no problem in their mind, us kayaking along the whole length of it. We were a bit more cautious than that. So in reality, Alfy spent a long time running around the capital city, Luanda, trying to get permits. So we spoke to the Ministry of Water and the Ministry of Electricity and various provincial governments of the areas we were going to be passing through, just to tell them what we're doing, to ask if they needed to give us paperwork. In some cases, they did give us paperwork. Alfy collected a huge stack of papers that said, we understand this is what they're doing, and that's all fine. So we were quite confident at the beginning of the journey that we'd have informed all the relevant authorities and had all the permits we required to do the trip.
When you're going along this river, I mean, what are your opportunities to resupply? Are there villages and cities where you can do so, or do you have to plan out, food resupplies and so on ahead of time?
We had to plan them out ahead of time. The Kwanza doesn't really go through any cities. It goes past a few towns. But Alfy was in charge of logistics. I think we chose originally 3 resupplies, one of which was quite near the town of Kamakupa, one of which was quite near the town of Malange, and another one that was in the middle of nowhere. But no, we weren't expecting to be able to get out of the kayak and walk into a village and buy things at any stage of the journey. So we were either carrying all the food that we needed, or we had deposited food with the Halo Trust and prearranged to meet them at certain GPS locations to get the food along the way. And it's quite lucky we did that, because at no stage really did we have the opportunity to purchase the supplies we needed along the journey, because long stretches of the Kwanza River are completely isolated. So I think at the beginning of the journey, we spent a good 4.5, 5 days without seeing another human being. So there was no chance to be buying food on those sections of the river.
What risks were you facing out there? What were you concerned about?
We kind of did a risk assessment before going, and I think the main risk was getting sick from insect-borne diseases, so especially mosquitoes. So we're going to be camping by the river for an entire month. There's no way to avoid getting bitten. You can put on as much DEET as you like. We were taking antibiotics, doxycycline, to make sure we didn't get malaria. But there are plenty of other nasty diseases that the mosquitoes can give you, such as dengue fever, which are just completely unavoidable. So the main risk was that one of us would sort of go down for a week or two with dengue or another mosquito-borne disease. And there's really not much we could do about that. We just had to cross our fingers. Luckily, that didn't happen. There's more exotic dangers as well. We had concerns about crocodiles. We had concerns about hippos. There were concerns relating to traveling through rapids, and there were a lot of waterfalls as well. And there are a few security concerns as well. So we were passing through areas where there's a lot of alluvial diamond mining happening, some of it illegal. There's a lot of people there with weapons who aren't supposed to be there, and people did warn us that they might not be happy seeing 2 foreigners, especially 2 foreigners with film equipment, passing through their illegal diamond mine. The most exotic danger, we heard there is actually a man-eating lion in one of the parks that we were going to have to be hiking through to get around a section of rapids. So the odds of encountering him probably quite slim, but it was a bit worrying to know that he was out there and he had eaten multiple people.
Yeah, that's scary. How many lions are in that section?
Very few, and there's not many lions in Angola. All of the wildlife like that got poached during the Civil War, sadly. So there's been a few initiatives to try and replace the animals since the war finished in 2002. But I think the lions tend to stay on the Zambian side of the border or stay down in the south if they can help it. They've learned that Angola is not a great place to be.
So were you navigating strictly by GPS, or were you using maps?
We couldn't find any print maps that were detailed enough to help us. So Alfy did try and contact the Portuguese Hydrographical Association and various other organizations to see if anyone had actually mapped the whole river out. No one had. So the initial mapping we did using Google Earth satellite photography, and then it was all GPS waypoints, so programmed into the GPS device. We were also highly reliant on people's advice as we went along the river, so especially fishermen. They gave us a lot of advice when it came to forks in the river, selecting which fork to go around, when to get out before rapids and waterfalls, that kind of thing. We got a lot of local advice from the fishermen.
So you start in the capital of Luanda, and how do you get to the starting point?
So we took a domestic flight to Huambo, which is down in the southeast. That is the headquarters, one of the major logistical centers for the Halo Trust. So one of their people picked us up. We picked up all our gear, and then from there they actually drove us to the source of the Kwanza River, which is actually a few hours out of Huambo, down to the southeast, I think. So that's where we started. They dropped us off there, and then the rest was down to us.
How long does it take to assemble the boat?
Alfy was the expert at this because he'd done it a few times before. I think from taking it out of the bag to getting it fully finished, it got it down to about 20 minutes.
Okay, so when you guys get started here, you don't start in the boat right away. You have to do some hiking for a bit. What was that first section like to hike to the first stretch of navigable water?
It was long and difficult, yeah. So the actual source of the river is just a sort of a small pond-looking thing, definitely not deep enough for us to assemble the kayak. So I think we had to do about 50 to 55 kilometers of hiking before the river got deep enough and wide enough for us to actually get in. So that was tough. We had to carry all of our gear. So it's over 100 kilos of gear that we had. Alfy had created this kind of tricycle contraption that was collapsible so that we could put all of our gear on there and drag the stuff. But this was dragging along all sorts of rough terrain, including sand. So it was really hard work. That first section was very, very hot and isolated. So yeah, it was a difficult beginning to the journey.
And on top of that, you started to develop back pain. How quickly did that happen, and how did you solve that problem?
So the back pain came within the first week of kayaking. We got out onto the river. The first day or so on the river we didn't get much distance done essentially because we got in the river in the wrong place. So it looked like a navigable section, but it very rapidly became a swamp. And we got lost in this sea of marsh area where we couldn't, the reeds were above our heads. We couldn't see what we're doing. The water was stationary, so it wasn't really giving us clues as to where to go. And we were physically having to get out and drag the boat. So the first day actually in the kayak was very, very difficult, but not too taxing in terms of actual having to put distance in. So the first day where we actually did some serious kayaking, so we got up into the 30s and 40 kilometers, that's when the back pain kicked in. So almost the first opportunity, that's when it happened. But luckily that was because of my seating position. It wasn't because of my lack of training, which I was worried about at the time.
Yeah, how many days did you have to endure that pain before you got the adjustments made?
It took us 2 days to work it out. Day one was horrendous, but then I thought maybe it's just me getting used to it. I got up again on the second day, exactly the same issues kicked in. And so at the end of that day, we did some tinkering. And in the end, all it took was taking a tire, one of the tires of our tricycle for dragging everything. I just put it under my seat, which raised me about 4 or 5 inches, and just the back pain vanished. So that's all it took.
In the book, you have the trip sort of divided into 3 sections. And right now we're kind of talking about the first section, which is the Kuito Bridge near the town of...
Yeah, so that near town of Kamakubi. Yeah. So that was the aim. So we're trying to get from the source to the Kuito Bridge. That was the first section, the most isolated section. And that was where we're going to get our first resupply from the Halo Trust.
Is this the section where the boat got damaged?
Yes, that is the section where the boat got damaged. Yeah, the very first section. Yes.
Yeah. The middle section, which we'll get into next, was probably the most difficult, but the first section was probably the second most difficult. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, yeah.
You guys you finally made it in some water you can paddle in, and you're going along. And I think I remember occasionally you might run into some small diamond mining, or you may run into some fishermen that sort of dam up the river. I think that's what happened in this case. You ran into what was like a makeshift dam, and you kind of got caught up in that. I'll let you explain.
Yeah, so this was day 10 of the expedition, and it was the day we were due to arrive at the Kuito Bridge. So we're very excited because on the original logistics plan, this was a very easy day. All we had to do was kayak about 15 or 20 kilometers, and then we're going to arrive in this settlement, and we're going to have all this delicious food and hopefully find someone who can sell us an ice cold Coca-Cola, and it's all going to be, the rest of the day is for relaxing, recovering before we start the next section. But that's, unfortunately, it was that kind of lapse in judgment. We were looking ahead already, and and in our minds already enjoying the relaxation. So we were in a rush to get those 15 or 20 kilometers finished. And I think that's why we made the mistake. So yeah, there was a fishing dam. They built it all the way across the river. It's about a sort of 30 or 40 meter wide section of the river. They'd chosen rapids because they like to put the dams in sections where it's very narrow. And they left a gap in between. I don't know why. Perhaps it had collapsed, or perhaps they just constructed it from one side, then the other, and they hadn't finished it yet. But for whatever reason, we thought instead of stopping, getting out and carrying the kayak around, it only would have required carrying the kayak for about 200 meters. So instead of doing that, we thought, well, let's just line it up and go through the middle, which was optimistic at best when I look back, especially considering how heavy and slow to maneuver the Klepper kayak is. You know, this isn't, when people think kayak, they think one of those small plastic ones that kind of self-rights and turns really easily. The Kleppers are very long. Well, it's 5.45 meters long, and it's over 100 kilos with all the gear in it. So it's not a thing that you can rapidly maneuver in rapids. So yeah, we got pushed off course by the rapids and just slammed into the fishing dam and sank and snapped the Klepper in half.
Oh man. So, okay. So now you have this boat that's getting probably pushed underwater. What happens? How do you pull yourself out of that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it all happened very quickly. I mean, luckily for the documentary film, I was actually filming all this on a GoPro because I thought, wouldn't this be a cool thing to film? You know, us skillfully navigating through this section of rapids and then going through this fishing dam. But in the end, I ended up filming the sinking, so it worked out quite well. But I mean, what we had to do is we had to immediately jump out onto the dam, so standing above the kayak, and then just start unloading it as quickly as possible. I mean, at this stage, things were already floating down the river. So, you know, we'd been given an iPad by the Wild Bird Trust so that we could record species as we went down the river. That immediately floated off. My boots floated off. A load of food and other stuff floated off. So it's all just heading down the river, never to be seen again. And we are desperately trying to get everything out of the kayak while it's underwater. And then eventually, once we got all that off, then we need to think about getting the kayak away from the dam because the pressure of the water was pushing it and snapping the support struts within the kayak. Eventually, we managed to do that. Some random man who happened to just walk out of the bush came over and helped us, which was very good. So there's 3 of us doing this. And then we had to assess the damage, and the damage was pretty extensive. We snapped a large proportion of all of the wooden sections of the skeleton of the kayak, and we lost a lot of gear, including destroying a lot of electronics.
In the book, you talk about some children, I guess, were trying to run downstream and get some of this gear back, but I guess from the sounds of it, you didn't get all of it back.
No, we didn't get all of it back. Although, again, you know, I always found this really surprising. We'd be in the middle of nowhere, completely isolated, and then sometimes someone would just appear out of the forest. And this was a perfect, opportune moment for that to happen. So one adult came out of the bush, helped us retrieve the kayak, and then suddenly a bunch of children appeared, kind of saw what was happening, and they ran down the river and fetched a few of the things that were floating as they went down. So we did get a couple of dry bags back that otherwise we wouldn't have got. But no, we didn't retrieve everything that floated off down the river.
Oh, man. Well, that's a bummer that boat got wrecked like that. But now you're in a situation where your boat is damaged and you have to figure out how to get it repaired, and you don't have any shoes. So
yes, that's correct. Yeah. So Alfy was more sensible, and he actually tied his shoes into the boat while we were kayaking. I'd been more casual about the whole situation. I'd just thrown them in, and yeah, so they were one of the first things to float off.
What happens next? You guys get everything back into shore. You must have to make your way into some sort of a village or something so that you can get some kind of repair work done, and you can somehow try to find a pair of shoes. Can you tell me what happens next?
Yeah, so in terms of choice of location to sink, we chose quite a good one because only about 3 kilometers down the river, there was quite a large diamond mining operation going on. A couple of the guys heard what was happening, walked up and kind of asked if we were okay, and then they told us if we just walked down the river to their site, there was a dirt road there, we could get in their 4x4 and they'd take us to the nearby mining town of Kamakupa, where we could try and get someone to fix the boat and also see if we could find some shoes and replace some of the other lost gear. So that was what happened, basically. They drove us there. They even let us stay the night in their apartment, which they used for all the mining guys. Really, really nice. And then tried as hard as they could to get us back out on the river the next day.
You found somebody that can try to make these repairs for you. Can you describe that process? I'm trying to imagine what exactly was happening with these repairs to these wooden pieces. Were they repairing it with other pieces of wood? Were they gluing things? Were they using metal pieces and screwing them into the wood? What was happening?
So the only person we could find, we had to ask around, is there a carpenter around? And the only person we could find in the entire place worked at the funeral parlor. So he spent almost all of his time making coffins. It's still working with wood, but it's not quite what we're looking for. So, I mean, all he could really do was find metal attachments and reconnect the sections that had fully snapped or reinforce the sections that had partially snapped. So he was kind of using divots and various strips of metal to try and get everything back together. He actually did a really good job. I mean, he thought the whole thing was hilarious. Very, very strange that these Westerners were willing to pay him to try and put these bits of wood back together and laid out on the floor. It really doesn't look like a kayak. He was very skeptical that it was a kayak, but we said, no, if we can get all these bits back together, it does turn into a skeleton. Then you pull the skin over it and then it's a big boat. He didn't believe us, but he was more than willing to try and put it all back together for us. And he did do an excellent job.
Do you know, did Alfy ever go back to Klepper and get like a new set of ribs for this?
No, Alfy still has the kayak. It's over in Hong Kong with him at the moment, actually. But no, he never bought a new set of ribs. So it's still got the custom Angolan repairs that we had done.
Yeah, that makes it more valuable now.
Yeah, it makes it a bit heavier as well now that it's got chunks of metal on it. But yeah, now it's got a story.
You managed to get resupplied, fixed up. You got yourself a pair of boots from the diamond miners. And so
yeah,
now
they were a size too small, but yes, I got a pair of boots.
And beggars can't be choosers, as they say.
Yes, that's right.
So now you're into part 2, which is Kamakupa to the Kampanda Dam, which has, I have my notes here, there's a lot of portages, a lot of rapids, highly isolated stretches, and at least 17 set of rapids. Tell me a little bit about this part of it.
We thought this was going to be a difficult section, and we were right. So we started this section behind schedule, unfortunately. This delay in Kamakupa was not accounted for, so we were already in a rush at the beginning of this section. So we needed to be getting a good 60, 65 kilometers of kayaking under our belts every single day to stay on track. And in order to do that, it meant getting up while it was dark, getting on the water the minute the sun came up, and then paddling essentially till sunset. That's on an ideal day. But there were many, many days where that couldn't happen because we had the sort of portage. So we had to get out, dismantle the kayak, and then carry it around sections of rapids and waterfalls. So we'd identified from Google satellite photography that there's at least 17 sets of rapids we couldn't do. So that's 17 times getting out. But in reality, as we went along, conditions had changed slightly. So based on local advice, we had to get out sometimes more, sometimes less than we were expecting. So yeah, there's a lot of delays on this section and also a lot of hippos. That was another major delay, was having to paddle past dangerous pods of hippos.
What happens when you come across hippos? I mean, what do you see and what noise do they make? Can you describe that?
This is something we tried to look into as much as possible before going. So we spoke to a team called the Okavango Wilderness Project. It's a bunch of guys who work with National Geographic. So they've done sections of river in Botswana and southern Angola that are very similar to what we're doing here. And they had come across many, many pods of hippos. So they were the only people we spoke to who had recent advice of how the hippos would react, what you should do, what's safe, what's not safe. I suppose the trouble is hippos are very aggressive and territorial. They're very fast. Like they can swim a lot faster than we could paddle the kayak. And they're also extremely hard to see. So if they're in the water, all you see is 2 eyes, 2 nostrils, and maybe a pair of ears. And if you think of the size of the animal, it's very, very hard to spot that, especially in water when there are reeds on both sides or if there's bits of wood floating down. Sometimes we wouldn't realize it was a hippo until we were very, very close. You had to pause, make sure they saw you. That's always really important. So you don't want to startle them. You don't want to come between them and their children. And you definitely don't want to get in the way of them getting from the bank to the center of the river. So if startled on land, their immediate reaction is to try and get in the river and get underwater to hide. So if your boat is between them, they will smash through your boat to get there. So those are kind of the three hard rules that we were trying to remember as we were passing these things. But it was difficult, especially on the sections where the river was narrow. I mean, often we had to get very, very close to go past. So had they decided they wanted to sink our boat, they could have done very easily.
Did you have any close calls?
Yeah, we had a few close calls. Actually, the very first hippo we met was an extremely close call. To save time, on reflection, this is a very bad idea, but to save time, instead of getting out to have lunch, Alfy and I would simply sit in the kayak and float down the river while eating, because then we'd get a kilometer or two of extra distance, depending on the flow rate of the river, while we were eating. The only issue with that being you're moving along completely silently without disturbing the surface of the water, which comes back to my first rule, which is don't startle them or surprise them. So our very first hippo we met, we were floating down the river, eating some biltong or whatever it is we were having for lunch. We saw a fisherman just an isolated fisherman, stood on the side of the bank. So this is the first question we asked all fishermen was, are there hippos on this stretch of the river? And the fisherman said, yes, there are some hippos further ahead. And we said, okay. And then we put our lunch away, got our paddles out, and the minute we put the paddle in the water, there was a hippo directly below the boat, which hadn't realized we were there. So this hippo was very, very upset, realizing what happened, and came shooting up directly behind us. The whole thing sounded like an explosion, like an air compressor going off, because the first thing they do when they come up is they exhale, then inhale very loudly. We didn't even see it. We just felt, and Alfy was at the back, so he was closer than I was, and we just had to sprint to get away from it as quickly as possible. Luckily, it was just as shocked as we were, so I think it went in the opposite direction, but we got very, very lucky with that first encounter.
How big are these hippos? Like, if you could compare it to the size of another animal that we would know here in North America, I don't know, like a cow. What's the size?
Much bigger.
Like
much bigger than a cow.
Like twice the size?
Oh yeah, at least twice the size, and much heavier. They're big, solid creatures. They've got huge jaws as well. So yeah, beautiful to look at from afar, but not to interact with on a daily basis.
Were there any like man-eating hippos, like the man-eating lion you mentioned?
Yeah, there were. We spoke. I mean, a few of the fishermen that we'd met told us they had friends who'd been killed by the hippos. And we met one fisherman in particular who, most of the fishermen, because they punt along in the reeds in these dugout canoes just using a big long stick, they are essentially taking the biggest risk because they're going right along the edge. The hippos like to graze in the reeds, but they're impossible to see if they're in the grass. And then as soon as they realize there's a person there, they'll charge through to get to the water, knocking these guys out of their boats, sometimes deliberately biting, trying to get them. So yeah, we had one guy who had a huge scar down his leg from a hippo tusk, and they all had stories about friends and relatives being killed by hippos. So they're extremely dangerous creatures. They kill a lot more people than all the other animals that people like to think kill, like lions in Africa. And in particular, we came across a pair. This was a pair of aggressive male hippos that tagged at least a day's delay onto our journey because they were actually in the river and refused to get out of the way and chased us up a tree, actually. That was the only way we could escape, was to bail out essentially and climb up a tree where they couldn't get us. And all the locals told us that those two hippos had been terrorizing their community for years.
At this point, I think you said you were trying to make up to 70 kilometers per day.
Yes.
Other than the hippo delay where you got chased up a tree, how are you keeping to your distance goal? Just
using every possible piece of daylight productively, essentially. So given the hippo risk, it wasn't a good idea to be on the river at night. And also it was often quite misty in the morning. So that was another danger. We'd have to wait till the mist had cleared before we could actually go out, because otherwise you couldn't see further than a few meters ahead, and then you were more likely to surprise a pod of hippos if we're going along quickly. But really it meant getting up super early, getting on the river as quickly as possible, and then going right till the very last bit of light, and then getting off the river quickly before it got fully dark. But it was hard. I mean, the flow rate varied from area to area. We had some sections of very slow flow rate, which really didn't help us. Towards the lower sections, it did get faster, which helped a lot. I think our best one-day record was about 74 kilometers, I think.
What kind of paddles were you guys using?
We used burner paddles, which we got from System X, who are an extreme sports supplier in the UK. We both had different paddles, actually, because we're different heights. So Alfy is a bit taller than me. He's about 6'2", I think. So he had a 2.1 meter paddle, I think. These were carbon fiber, whereas I had a just under 2 meter paddle. Also, he was at the back of the kayak, which made a difference as well. So he needed slightly larger paddle. We were very grateful to have those because they were absolutely indestructible, and it was great that they were so lightweight, considering how long we had to hold them every day.
You mentioned eating biltong. What is that?
Biltong is it's like, I suppose in the US the equivalent would be jerky, beef jerky.
Okay.
So it's like South African cured dried meat, basically.
Eventually, you guys finish this second, the middle section, and you get to. I have it in my notes as, or I guess at the Melange Bridge. You go from the Bié province into the Melange province. Around this,
yes.
Is it the city of Dondo? And there's a hydroelectric dam there. But in this third section, you guys are looking forward to it because it's more populated. There's no hippos, and you should be able to, kind of cruise into the finish, so to speak. And
yes, yeah. The third section was going to be safer and easier. Safer because it's guaranteed no hippos because of the massive dam and because of all the poaching that happened in the more populated sections of the lower stretches. Yeah, no hippos, which is always good. And also it was good because Alfy had already been able to drive to that section of the river and do sections of it in the past with his brothers. So he had a very clear idea of what that was going to be like, and he knew there were no rapids or waterfalls, which was good.
If I remember correctly, you guys are coming in around these hydroelectric dams, and you're a little concerned about maybe getting in trouble for being too close to these getting in trouble from the security forces or something around these dams. And so you go to a small village where you try to get permission to camp there for a night. And then after that, that's when you start running into trouble with the bureaucracy. I'll let you explain it from there.
This was a concern before we even started the trip. So we knew we were going to be paddling very close to Kapanda Hydroelectric Dam. We understand that because of the legacy of civil war, the Angolan authorities are very paranoid about foreigners going near critical infrastructure. So something like a hydroelectric plant, not a good idea to go near it. So we knew that in advance. So Alfy actually got permission from the Ministry of Water and the Ministry of Electricity, I think. He said, look, we're going to be doing this trip. We're going to go past this dam, but we're not going to go there. I think the closest we got to the dam, the camping site we picked was almost 10 kilometers from the dam. Still not far enough, apparently. But anyway, so we did tell them in advance. We got permission to do this. But yeah, we did think, okay, it's sensible to give that a wide berth because they are quite sensitive about these things. So we paddled up to it and then kept going. And then we went about 10K away. And obviously the plan after that was to hike around the dam and get back in on the other side. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do that because that was when we were arrested for spying.
Yeah. So then this is where it gets into the crazy bureaucracy. You basically are kind of passed from sort of one set of people to another until you end up making your way to this. I don't know what the word is. It's almost like a detention center where that's where they process the deportations.
Yeah, it's a deportation center. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But I remember in the book, there was one guy in particular, maybe he was a military guy or maybe he was a police captain or something who was giving you the most headache. Can you kind of describe some of these people that you were running into during this time?
Well, it was an interesting mix of security forces. So we camped 10K from the dam. That night we were arrested at gunpoint, handcuffed and dragged off to the local police department, which is right at Kapanda, whose main job, it would appear to be, is to guard the dam and look after the communities around the dam. So we started there, which is actually quite a rural location. And then the next day, they decided that because whatever we'd done was so sensitive and serious, they decided they're going to transfer us to the provincial capital, which is Melange, which is actually over 140 kilometers away, not at all convenient. So we got driven over there. Then we got detained there for longer, and then they decided that because what we'd done was so incredibly serious, we needed to be returned to the actual capital city of the whole country, Luanda, which is another 300 and something kilometers away. And that's when we got dragged back there. This is 3 days later, driven with the police. And that's when they put us in the deportation center. And presumably their plan from there was to deport us, stick us on a plane and kick us out of the country. But yeah, I suppose the person who gave us the most issues and the person who made this all happen was the provincial police commander in Malange. So the most important police officer in that province. For whatever reason, I think he was very upset that we were paddling a kayak down the river through his province and took it upon himself to ensure that we were not going to complete our journey and needed to be removed from the country. We did actually meet him at one stage of the detention to try and reason with him, but he wasn't feeling very reasonable when we met him. So there was no persuading him that what we were doing was perfectly normal. We had permission, and it was actually for charity, for quite a worthwhile charity, given that his province, Malange province, is quite heavily landmine contaminated.
Yeah, sometimes you just run into those people. And they took away all of your stuff, except they didn't take Alfy's phone. So
yes, or my GoPro, which is good. So I got to record being under arrest. Yeah. So when they picked us up, I mean, it was the middle of the night. I wasn't asleep yet, but I think Alfy was. It's gone midnight. They unzipped the tents and stuck AK barrels of their rifles in the tents, which was a bit concerning. But yeah, once they'd actually dragged us out and handcuffed us, they didn't even take the tents down. They just scooped them up and chucked them in the back of their 4x4 so they could take all our stuff. But I think Alfy had his mobile phone in his pocket when they dragged him out the tent. And for whatever reason, I had the GoPro in the pocket of my shorts. So they put us in the police station and left us unsupervised, thankfully, with both a phone that connected to the network and with my GoPro. So I did a little diary camera update from the detention center.
So luckily, you guys have some connections, and you were able to make the necessary phone calls to get yourself out of the situation. So in the book, it seems like you're like minutes away from being deported. And then what happens?
To this day, neither of us really understand, and we're not sure what connections or who said what. But yes, you're right. The situation seemed to be that we were in the detention center. They were going to keep us over the weekend, and then on Monday they were going to put us on a plane and kick us out of the country. By that stage, the British consul was with us, and the Italian consul, because I'm also an Italian citizen. He was also involved. He was making phone calls behind the scenes. And we don't know what happened, but I know that the British consul said he was going to try and get in contact with Isabel dos Santos, who is the daughter of the president, because they have a relationship at the embassy for some reason. So he was going to get through to her office and see if they could do something. Whereas I think the Italian consul said he was going to try and get in touch with the Minister of Interior, again, through a pre-existing relationship and see what was happening. And suddenly, nothing to do with what we said. We'd been sat there for hours saying nothing. The phone went off. The guy in charge of the detention center, who up until that stage had been quite curt with us, suddenly he was all smiles, demanding that we be released and given our stuff back and driven back wherever. And, this has all been a huge misunderstanding. We're very, very sorry. You can leave. So, no, even to this day, no one has told us who phoned who or what happened, but something happened behind the scenes, and I think reason prevailed.
I guess the smart thing to do, or maybe that's not the right word, maybe not the smart thing, the conservative thing to do would have been to just kind of lay low and just, okay, I guess that's the end of our adventure. But you guys decided, no, we're going to have part 2 of this, and we're going to make a second attempt. So you go back out there to where you were picked up, and you begin the rowing, or the paddling to finish this trip. But you're trying to stay low under the radar. How long did it take you from when you made that decision to finish that last section?
That last section really didn't take long. I think it was about 4 or 5 days. So this was against the advice of the British embassy. So as you can imagine, the British consul said, it's great that you guys are out. I don't really know what happened, but for goodness sake, don't go back out on the river. Like just go back to the capital city, and well done. You did some of it, but you didn't do all of it, which wasn't really acceptable to either of us. Having spent 9 months planning it and having done all the hardest bits, it really felt like we were having the prize snatched out from under us, because we knew that last section was very, very easy. So we planned that night what we're going to do, and then the next morning at the crack of dawn, we headed straight back out and got back on the river. But we did have to treat the trip a little bit differently from then on, even though we weren't doing anything wrong, we had to be very, very careful that we didn't get picked up by any other police or anything like that, because we had no idea, whether there was something written on the system about what we were and weren't allowed to be doing, whether the provincial commander in Malange had told the police on the river to look out for us. We had no idea. So it felt a bit like a covert expedition now. So we were deliberately trying to avoid other people on the river. We were only camping when it was pitch black and making sure our fires weren't visible from other places. And we were really trying to get as much distance under our belts as possible to get finished as quickly as possible in that last week.
Yeah, there was one point where you had to go around like a police checkpoint on the river itself. How did you guys do that?
Yeah, that's right. So that's the only checkpoint on the entire Kwanza River, and the police there actually have a patrol boat, and they actually go up and down. Not sure what they're doing. Presumably they're checking boats coming in and out for contraband or whatever. But yeah, that was our last major concern, because getting picked up there, another delay. My visa was also quite close to running out, so I didn't have time for another 4 or 5 day delay. So yeah, we just had to, we pulled up to the corner where we knew it was, and then slowly crept round the corner to see who was there. And then we could see that there was no one on the jetty and that the boat was all tied up. And then we just had to kind of sprint past 400 or 500 meters until we were around another meander and they couldn't see us anymore. That was a tense moment at the end of the trip.
What's it like when you reach the Atlantic Ocean?
It was tough. The last section was really, really tough. The wind was directly into our faces. It was very, very choppy. The flow rate fell down to sort of zero. It really wasn't helping us. So yeah, the last section, especially the last day, was really, really tough physically, especially having been out on the water for 31 days already. And we actually almost sank. In the last 200 meters of the journey, we nearly sank, which would have been very embarrassing. So we actually had Alfy's girlfriend was on the jetty. A couple of our friends were there. They're kind of waving a flag and holding a bottle of champagne, waiting for us to arrive. And the wind was blowing so hard, waves were kind of coming over and into the kayak. So it was slowly filling up with water, and I could feel it moving lower and lower in the water. So there was a concern in the last 20 minutes that we're actually going to have to swim the last section, which isn't great because that mouth of the Kwanza has bull sharks and it has crocodiles.
Did you see any?
Yeah, we did. We saw a huge crocodile. We for the last few days, we saw a lot of big crocodiles. So on the last day especially, they built a huge golf course right near the mouth of the Kwanza, which is a sensible place to put a golf course because you can just pull all the water out of the river for watering the greens. But unfortunately for the golf course, the crocodiles have decided that's the best place to sunbathe. So they all just go and hang out on the different holes. So yeah, we saw some huge crocodiles over on the golf course and then slipping into the river.
Oscar, what about this expedition are you the most proud of?
I just think the fact we finished. I think there were so many opportunities to not finish. So many things that went wrong. It would have been quite easy to give up at various stages. So I'm just happy we got the whole thing done, basically. And that Alfy and I are still talking at the end of it. So no major bust-ups, despite being alone together for over a month.
What's your most memorable moment when you look back?
Most exciting, I suppose, was when we sank. I think that at the time, not in a positive way, but that was quite a thrilling experience. And then having to deal with that over the next 24 to 48 hours. So overcoming that obstacle was the most difficult, I think. But the one thing that stands out to me about the entire journey is the hippos. I mean, I still kind of have nightmares about them today. They're just constant exposure to these massive, dangerous animals, and knowing that you're going to have to get up the next day and go past them again and, run the gauntlet multiple times every single day without knowing whether they're going to come and put their tusks through the kayak and sink you. So that was the most surprising part of the journey because we couldn't get accurate data for how many hippos there are, but we just knew there were some. So there were a lot more hippos than we were expecting. And that made the whole first 2 sections of the journey very, very stressful. So that's what really stands out in my mind when I think about the trip.
What do we need to know about the Halo Trust?
So I think you gave a good overview in the introduction there. So the world's largest and oldest humanitarian landmine clearance organization. They work in some really, really impressive places, as you can imagine. And the reason we're raising money for them in Angola in particular is because they have this a lot of the world's landmine clearance organizations have this big plan, which is landmine free 2025. So the aim is to have removed the landmines from every landmine affected country by 2025. And unfortunately, Angola is a country of major concern for them. I think Angola and Afghanistan are the only two countries where they're worried they're not going to meet that 2025 deadline. So there's a huge number of landmines in Angola that still need removing. They're working hard to do it, but they're having issues with funding. They need people's support. So I think they're a really worthwhile organization to support because landmines are pretty apolitical. Even the Taliban are very enthusiastic about landmine removal. So I think that's something that everyone can get behind.
How did your fundraising go for them? Did you meet your goal?
We did meet our goal, yeah. So I think the goal originally was to raise $10,000, and that pays for a landmine clearance team to work for 1 month in a particular area. In our case, they'd already selected the team and they'd already chosen the area, which is Cuita Carnavale, which is down in the southeast of the country, which has the sad title of Africa's most landmine town. So it was the scene of an extremely large battle during the Civil War in 1988, and it's still got huge fields of landmines to show for it. So the plan was to get $10,000, and that would get a certain number of landmines cleared. In the end, actually, we did much better than that. I think we made over $25,000, which was a real surprise to us. I mean, when we first started, I thought 10,000 sounded like a lot and was a bit concerned, were we actually going to do that? But yeah, we got about $25,000 of donations in the end, which is fantastic. It meant they could deploy 2 teams for a longer amount of time, and we even got sent a list of the number of landmines they managed to pull out of the ground, and it was in the hundreds, which is fantastic.
Wow! Congratulations!
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good chunk of money. Are you still taking donations?
Yes, we are. I suppose we're doing it in 2 ways now. I mean, our Just Giving page is actually still live, and it gets automatically transferred over to the Halo Trust. So if people are interested, they can just look up Kayak the Kwanza on Just Giving and they can donate there. Or I've written a book about the journey called Kayak the Kwanza, which was released in March by Unbound in the UK. And I'm donating 25% of the profits from that book sale specifically to the Halo Trust in Angola so they can try and reach this landmine-free 2025 goal that they have. So yeah, if you want to read about the trip and donate to Halo, you can get the book, either a print version or you can download instantly a Kindle version. It's available on Amazon, or if you just type Kayak the Kwanza, you'll find it because we have a website with it.
Okay, kayakthekwanza.com. That's KWANZA or ZA if you're from the Z part of the world. Do you have any other adventures on the horizon?
I have 2 potential adventures, but nothing specific planned at the moment. So there's only one I can talk about. Both of them involve hiking or kayaking along rivers. One is to do the longest river in Madagascar, which is called the Mangoki River. It's down in the southwest of the country. It's an extremely isolated river, but it's not as long as the Kwanza. It's only about 550 kilometers long. So that's one that I would be enthusiastic about doing if Alfy and I can come up with a time. The other one I can't tell you about at the moment. However, if all goes according to plan, I should be tweeting details of the expedition in the next few weeks. So yeah, our handle on Twitter is also Kayak the Kwanza.
Oscar Scafidi, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing the story. And congratulations to you and Alfy for the accomplishment of getting this done. And I really enjoyed reading the book. So I encourage everybody to go to kayakthekwanza.com, check it out, check out the book you want, reasonably priced on Amazon. And hey, good luck to you guys in the future.
Thank you very much. And if people don't want to read, but they would like to find out more about the journey, we actually have a 52-minute HD documentary, which is on YouTube. So if you just type Kayak the Kwanza into YouTube, you can bring up the documentary, watch it free of charge.
Thank you for mentioning that. I have not seen it yet, so I'm going to go check that out, and I'll put all these links in the show notes as well.
Yeah, you can go and laugh at us sinking. Yes.
Thanks, Oscar.
Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you for listening. You can find this episode online at thepursuitzone.com/TPZ171. Be sure to subscribe to the show. You'll find subscription links over at thepursuitzone.com. And like the show on Facebook or follow along on Twitter at @thepursuitzone. To send feedback, you can write me at paul@thepursuitzone.com or leave me a voice message at speakpipe.com/thepursuitzone. This episode was recorded on May 24th, 2019. For the show notes and more great adventure travel podcasts, visit thepursuitzone.com.